Hi there, I'm Rowan Simpson, and this is my pitch for Emergent Games Technologies. This pitch is called An Exploration of Historical Armed Combat and Motion Capture by Rowan Simpson. That's me. So, what is this project? Well, let's get into it. So, originally, this idea was going to be a more gameplay oriented project. I was going to look into how games such as Kingdom Come Deliverance had medieval first person combat, and I was going to deal with things like stance switching, weapon weight, etc. etc. But the more I looked into it, I thought there could be more to this. There could be more than just video games. A little bit about me. I'm mainly a technical animator for video games, and I thought I could kind of branch out and broaden my horizons a little bit. So I looked into things such as the Fortnite Voices of the Forgotten. This was an event that would allow players to visit a real museum about the Holocaust and learn about what happened, the history, in a interactive way. I was also reminded by the museum level in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, where the player can look at scenes from the game as if they were like dioramas. So I thought, why not combine medieval history, combat, and this idea of a educational diorama? So this is where I was reminded of the Eyewitness books. These books were a visual encyclopedia of historical events, items, weapons, castles, etc. And the way these books worked was they would have a load of information conveyed to you, but they would also have visual aids and usually have real scans or real photographs from museums and like archaeological finds. And I thought a good way to combine the educational parts of my project could be with visuals. And this is where my technical animation background came in. I thought I could display actual medieval armed combat with the history behind it in a fun but entertaining way, with the goal being to tell the viewer about history and about martial arts, but also have a like compelling visual to go along with it. So this brings me on to what are my aims for this project. In a brief context, my aim for this project is to create a almost documentary style video, but I want it to be fully animated, fully motion captured, and displayed inside of Unreal Engine. But the must, should, and could of this is I must utilize motion capture data technology to display an accurate example of 14th to 16th century armed combat, obviously with a historical context. I must display the project inside of Unreal 5, or should display the project inside of Unreal 5 using sequences, cinematic tools, and voiceovers to recite the historical aspects of the project. Throughout these slides, I will be explaining why I'm choosing these softwares here: Unreal Engine, Motion Builder, Viacom Motion Capture Systems, and Audacity. But I should create a historically accurate sword fighting experience using realistic data, using primary examples and resources such as HEMA practitioners. We'll get into it. And the could is to have a playable combat experience showcasing dynamic controls, allowing the player to use different stances and change experiences on the fly. But this is a could. So, what research have I done for this project? So as you can see here, I have a menagerie of different resources and information on a Miro board, from articles of medieval combat practitioners, HEMA, European martial arts in general. We have some videos showing the different stances, how to fight with a sword, the basics, and the overall like silhouettes. This was very, very important when planning out the motion capture shoots. I was looking at different games and different game engines that use medieval combat, and Kingdom Come was a very big inspiration for this project because, again, they used motion capture, motion builder, and Unreal Engine 5. Again, a range of different manuscripts and different historical references, and different types of digital exhibitions in history. And here's some motion capture shoots. We'll get into that later on. But this was my idea board, my brainstorm, my Miro board. So, a bit of history first. These two fine gentlemen are some of the more famous examples of historical European martial artists, swordsmen, fencers, etc. This is Joachim Meyer. He's a German fencing master from the 16th century. He wrote the thorough description of fencing, and he was one of the pioneers of the ox stance, and he trained in longsword combat. Now, much of his work was studied from this person here, Johannes Lichtner. He is the grandfather of basically all modern sword combat. He's a German fencing master, considered the founder of the German school of fencing. He had a system that influenced European swordsmanship for over 2 centuries, and he created and structured the longsword combat system that's still used today. A lot of HEMA people will know this guy, and he becomes very important in this project later on. So one thing you will notice about this project is there's a lot of books, a lot of reading, a lot of literature. So these were a bunch of books that I found when researching how do I get into European longsword, how do I get into HEMA, how do I get into historical martial arts. These books were pretty integral for learning a lot of the stances, the reasons why, who did what, etc., etc. This is the L'Effort de Battaglia. This is a book on early sword fighting. This is the Gladiatora, actually written by our friend from the previous slide, Johannes Lichtner. This is Fighting with German Longsword. This is a more modern version of the systems taught in these classic manuscripts. And this was a book, The Martial and Ethic in Early Germany and early modern Germany. This was a book more about what was going on at the time, with the actual sword fighting being a background. This was a good resource for actually learning the history of Bavaria and other parts of the Holy Roman Empire. Go to my next slide. To boil down some of the main points of what I learned from this research into historical European martial arts, I learned about the Wehrliga or Vonliga is the 4 primary guards: the ox, a high guard for thrusting, a plough, a low guard, the Vomtag from the roof, a strong upwards cutting guard, and the Alba or full guard, a deceptive low guard. I was planning the motion capture shoots and almost like storyboarding using these images. These are all derived from classical manuscripts, but these are all modern versions. And as you can see, some very standout, powerful shapes here. This will be very important when shooting any motion capture data, as the silhouettes need to be recognizable. I need to be able to tell, oh, this is an ox stance. For example, there's an X, the ox stance. These are integral, essentially just early storyboards for planning any shoots. So this is where I began looking more deeper into like how video games and engines have done dioramas for different historical things, or even just exhibitions. And I found the Mona Lisa Beyond the Glass project. This was a fusion of art and technology, and it allowed people to view the Mona Lisa in a 3D way, and it was like you were looking through the eyes of Da Vinci himself. This made use of 3D modeling, animation, and the original artwork scanned in, and they created a lovely 3D model here that you could actually sit down, have a look at, walk around, and you could learn the history while you were there. So these examples used Unreal Engine, and this was also like solidifying the fact that I was like, yep, I'm going to display this inside of Unreal Engine. Number one, because it's what I'm familiar with. It's the pipeline I know for technical animation, and it's just familiar to me. But also the actual reasoning that other large-scale exhibitions and dioramas have done this. So it's doable. It's got some groundworks. For example, the Notre Dame Paris, A Journey Back in Time by Ubisoft. So essentially, for Assassin's Creed, I think it was Unity, they created the Notre Dame Cathedral by fully 3D scanning it, going in, getting all the textures, getting all the architecture, and making it a 3D model in the game that you could explore. And when the cathedral burned down in 2019, this data was actually used in reconstructing the cathedral in real life, but also as a digital project where you could go around and look at the cathedral. They displayed this inside of Unreal Engine 5. And this is another example of an art exhibition, Fortnite x Radiohead. This was a virtual exhibition inside of Fortnite's creative mode for the Kid Amnesia album. I think it was the 21st anniversary. And essentially you could go around and there were like videos playing of different music videos, but it was also a interactive diorama. You could learn the history of the album and the band. You could talk to each of these little guys here. Well, you couldn't talk. You could look at them. Getting ahead of myself. But essentially, this was a full, expansive 3D art exhibition that you could go around for entertainment as well as educational purposes. Some more examples I'll be brief with. There's a current project going on right now called Virtual Ancient Rome, Rome Reborn. Essentially, it is using real historical data and maps to completely recreate Rome as it was hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And the idea for this is you'd be able to walk around the streets, you would see motion capture actors walking around, talking, selling things, just living their day-to-day life. This is more aimed at VR, but again, this is a reconstruction of history, almost a diorama, where you can look at things and learn at the same time. Again, combining that entertainment factor and history. Same thing goes here with the virtual Tutankhamun. This one is more of a video, but you can sit and experience it, and it's in a 3D sort of landscape. It comes out and you sit down and they kind of cast around you a projection of ancient Egypt. It's a bit like the virtual suite here at the university. Another example of combining history and entertainment, though not always completely accurate, but very entertaining and also gets that HEMA aspect I wanted, was the TV show Deadliest Warrior, where essentially they would gather a bunch of data from like hitting things with swords, looking at different martial arts skills, looking at like the types of weaponry different cultures and different time periods had, and then they would pit this data together and they would create simulations, and the last simulation, the big win, would be the one they would show, so whoever won the most. And then they would make a reconstruction of it with live action actors, but they later moved on to digital reconstructions and motion capture, and they also did a video game with it. And I think it was a really fun, entertaining way to get into history. Personally, in 2005, I absolutely loved it. Once again, this is another example of combining video games and history. This was the Nuremberg Verdict of Nations, VR Verdict. I'll speed through this real quick, but essentially you could go through and see in real time a historical like set piece of the Nuremberg trials, and you could learn about all of the horrible things the Nazis did. You could learn about the law, you could learn about the history at the time, the place. It's completely free on Steam as well, but they also made use of motion capture actors and voice acting to get the point across. But yeah, this was a very good experience. I highly recommend it if you've got a VR, if you can borrow one. Really interesting. As you can see, I'm a bit of a history buff. I enjoy history. But we'll move on to the next thing. So why am I using Motion Builder compared to other softwares? Well, Motion Builder is specialized in motion capture and character animation. Motion Builder also allows me to have literally like almost 100 takes in one file, and I can switch between. And when I'm doing a bunch of different sword stances, different angles, different guards, different blocks, that's very useful. Motion Builder allows me to change things on the fly in real time. It also allows me to directly work within Unreal Engine if I set up the skeletons in the same hierarchy. Disadvantages: there's like no documentation. You kind of have to brute force learning Motion Builder or read some forums from like 20 years ago. It's also super expensive. Luckily, it's available to me at the moment. Here are some late mocap footage that I recorded using Motion Builder. As you can see, very clean. I believe I show a bunch of takes, so I can switch between takes on the fly. So Motion Builder is the way to go for me for motion capture, as is something I'm familiar with, but also it's an absolute industry powerhouse. Most video game companies and a lot of film uses Motion Builder for its products. 10 out of 10 would recommend. So another reason to use Unreal and Motion Builder and Viacom motion capture systems. I spoke to a person from the Warhorse Studios animation team, and I was able to find out that they used optical motion capture tracking technology to get full body animations for combat, cutscenes, and NPCs, as well as the player character. The mocap was recorded using Viacom, and the cleanup and prep was Motion Builder and Maya. And Warhorse also worked with real historical European martial arts practitioners to get the most realistic versions of combat and the most realistic historical aspects of things like the guards, the movement, etc. Lovely person, gave me a lot of great information here, and it was something I could actually look at and be like, okay, how can I go about doing this? And I'm glad I reached out, because a lot of useful information for this project. Also, I just absolutely love the game, and I think they did a fantastic job grabbing that both historically relevant and correct information with complete entertainment. I also came across this gentleman who was creating a HEMA-based combat game using real HEMA techniques. And he was using Maya's human arcade system, very similar to Motion Builder, to look at things like prop placement and dealing with weight and weaponry and gripping hands and FKIK chains, all that lovely stuff. So I got into contact. I was like, you have no idea how useful this is. And then I had to pick his brain a bit. But he's also using Unreal Engine 5 to display this. And honestly, it is a brilliant project. I highly recommend checking it out. And it was really useful to find someone who has a bit more insight on things like this, someone who's currently working on this when I was working and planning to do this. It was integral. It was really important that I could see it's doable. So these are some of the early motion capture sessions we did. These were just test sessions, just to get like a feel of like how the sword play would work. We were testing like weight balance and things like that. As you can see here, the data came out super clean. This was using a Viacom motion capture stage. If you look here, we're trying to get positioning like the X for the ox. And here's me doing a bit of direction, letting him swing a sword at me. This is Jake. Jake came in later on as he has actual HEMA practice and he knows his stuff. We ended up collaborating for this. So these are another example of a motion capture shoot. This was a fully planned one where we got someone who actually knows HEMA, historical European martial arts, in case you forgot. And this is where we looked into actually creating the animations and making sure those silhouettes were correct. It was fun to do a bit of direction here. I was like, these silhouettes, see how the leg is always angled and you were sort of aiming to where you want to thrust the sword. Again, important. I wanted the silhouette to show each stance clearly, because that was very important when putting it into Engine, especially if I was putting it on a model. You want to be able to go, oh, that's a Raf stance, that's a Ox guard. So direction, communication is very important when filming these motion capture shoots. And this is a little test animation where we use an actual weighted sword. Having an actual weighted sword improved the data almost tenfold. You could actually feel the attacks and stances, skill behind each move. So what is my project summary for this project? What is my goal? What is my end point? I would like to have a meaningful exploration of history and martial arts in a fun and entertaining way. I would like to display this as like some sort of series or documentary style piece of footage. I was looking into ways of expanding this, like it becoming a series of different things. I was looking at a exploration of, and then ... For example, this is historical armed combat. Whereas I could branch this out in so many ways because of how versatile motion capture is. You can grab an actor, train them up, and they can encompass and become any person, any creature, any, martial artist. But for example, I've got a background in judo. I was thinking of like, you could expand this as an educational thing, like the books from the start, the eyewitness books. You could have an exploration of historical armed combat and motion capture, but then you could also have an exploration of the history of judo and motion capture, an exploration of professional wrestling and motion capture. Like there's no horizon broad enough for this. You can just keep researching and making things entertainment. And that's essentially what this pitch is. I wanted to branch out from video games. I wanted to be able to explain that with the power of motion capture, with the power of Unreal Engine 5, I can create these things. I can make these environments. I can set up these characters. I can do the research. I can do the data. I can direct the actors, and we can create something. We can create something educational, entertaining, fun, and also emergent, something new, something groundbreaking. Here's some examples of the animations inside of the engine. Very clean, very nice. Some more examples here. But essentially, that's my pitch for what this project is and why I'm doing it. I hope that comes across. So here's an example of an early
The ox rises beside the head, the sword angled forward like the horns of a great beast. From this elevated guard, a fighter could threaten the powerful thrusts and dominate the high line. This stance was recorded by Johannes Lichtner in the whole...
I won't spoil the rest. If you made it to the end of this PowerPoint, I appreciate you and thank you very much for listening.